Columns of North Korean soldiers are moving closer to the Russian-Ukrainian front. The day before, the Financial Times reported that, although they do not understand sit, run, take, date, phases, fire commands, as well as go for the assault and others, language problems and barriers are occurring. However, the movement of North Koreans continues. They are already 50 kilometers from the borderline between Russia and Ukraine and are in the Kursk region. There is evidence of this from Ukrainian intelligence, Western intelligence, South Korean intelligence, and more. The Russians themselves, of course, are also talking about this, although just a few days ago, Russian dictator Putin said that it was their sovereign right to decide what to do and how to cooperate with North Korea under the Comprehensive Cooperation Agreement signed on June 19, 2024, when Putin was on a visit to North Korea. Korean troops in Ukraine pose a threat to the entire world. Yesterday, we and all our civilized partners spoke about this at Nabat during an emergency meeting of the UN Security Council that we convened. Of course, I see little point in this after Secretary General Antonio Guterres traveled to Kazan to hug and curtsy to Putin.
Обійматися і ось так в реверансах повипадати перед Путіним. Щоправда, багато хто каже, що не треба сварити Гутерреша, бо він то поїхав.
Many argue we shouldn't criticize Guterres for urging Putin to adhere to the UN Charter and pursue peace. But really, who goes to Kazan and smiles at a dictator? In contrast, Ukraine's permanent representative to the UN doesn't smile at the Russian delegation. Instead, he highlights that the threat from North Korean troops is a global security challenge, as the DPRK has its own ambitions. And not just helping Russia in its war against Ukraine. Sending North Korean troops to Ukraine threatens the world, said Ukraine's UN representative, Sergiy Kyslytsya. This is the most dangerous recent development in the war. Increased cooperation between Russian and DPRK armies threatens Europe, the Korean Peninsula. The DPRK has its own ambitions. Those DPRK soldiers, especially officers, who survived the Russian-Ukrainian war will return to their region with exceptional experience in modern warfare. These military personnel will be used not only in the war against Ukraine, as the Russian and DPRK regimes openly threaten the world. This behavior is a consequence of the calming tolerance enjoyed by the Russian state. In response to its attitude towards the UN and the Security Council, the belief that restricting protection for Ukraine from two nuclear powers will make them more inclined toward peace is naive. This position is either infantile or cynical. Tying the hands of a defending state can only provide a few years of peace at the expense of Ukraine, its people, and infrastructure. Russia is not crossing your red line, it is walking the red carpet. Sergiy Kyslytsya characterizes the paralysis of the United Nations. Kyslytsya criticized the UN Security Council at a meeting, stating that Russia's presence blocks its work and undermines global security. He pointed out that the organization's leniency toward Russia has led to its paralysis and ineffectiveness. In his speech, Kyslytsya called for active action, emphasizing that if Russia's presence blocks the work of the Security Council, then other formats should be considered to ensure global security. From time to time, we hear that Russia will not cross the red lines of the civilized world, but open your eyes. Russia is not just crossing your red lines. It is walking a red carpet woven of soft answers, unreasonable hopes, and complacency. Kyslytsya also asked a good question. How many more events need to happen for the international community to recognize the fact that Russia will not stop destroying the global security system? He also named generals of the DPRK army. A 12,000-strong DPRK military contingent is being trained in Russia. The permanent representative of Ukraine to the United Nations said this in his speech. These soldiers are being trained at 5 training grounds in eastern Russia. This contingent includes at least 500 officers of the DPRK army, 3 generals. The text of the speech mentions the names of these generals of the DPRK Army General Staff. Colonel General Kim Yong-bog, Deputy Chief of the General Staff for Special Forces Operations. Colonel General Lee Chang-ho, Deputy Chief of the General Staff, Head of the Main Operational Department. Kyslytsya stated that Russia plans to form at least 5 units of 2,000 to 3,000 soldiers each from the North Korean military. One such unit is equivalent to a motorized rifle regiment, and DPRK servicemen are expected to wear Russian uniforms and use Russian small arms. They will receive Russian identity, documents, and be integrated into Russian units with ethnic minorities, such as a Buryat battalion in the 11th Separate Airborne Assault Brigade, to conceal the presence of DPRK military personnel. The Ukrainian diplomat said that 7 planes with 2,100 soldiers were sent from Russia to the border with Ukraine. Ukraine believes that the number of North Korean troops deployed from the east of Russia is 4,500. They will start participating in combat operations in November. 400 North Koreans have been transferred to the west of the Kurda region in Russia. Vasyl Nebenzia said that the transfer of soldiers from the DPRK to Russia is disinformation aimed at justifying NATO's decision to send its troops to Ukraine. This statement was made during a meeting of the UN Security Council. He added that the DPRK is a close partner of Russia. As for the deployment of troops to Russia, this is disinformation. The performance we saw today is an attempt to justify the decision to send NATO troops. Our interaction is of a trans-partner nature. This is our sovereign right. Russia's cooperation with the DPRK in the military and other spheres does not violate international law, as such cooperation is not directed against a third country. Russia plans to develop this cooperation. On October 30th, a UN meeting was held in New York. North Korean troops in Russia's war against Ukraine. The involvement of DPRK troops in the war is an escalation and violates international law. The North Korean military may take part in hostilities on the territory of Ukraine sooner than we think, and this will be an even greater escalation of this war. An estimated 600,000 Russian soldiers have been killed or wounded since the war began. Russia continues to send troops into the conflict and now aims to do the same with North Korean soldiers. Deepening military cooperation between Russia and the DPRK poses a threat to both the European continent and Asia. This unprecedented support from Moscow is changing the entire dynamics and geopolitical situation on the Eurasian continent. This will have a serious impact on the Korean Peninsula. Cooperation between Russia and the DPRK will lead to the transfer of military technologies. South Korea urges Russia to end the war, withdraw its troops from Ukraine, and respect its sovereignty and territorial integrity. Most members emphasized the involvement of GDR troops is an escalation. Barbara Woodworth stated that cooperation between Russia and the DPRK directly violates several UN Security Council resolutions, which Russia itself voted for. This undermines international peace, security. Robert Woods said that the Kremlin turned to the DPRK for help because it felt helpless. There is an escalation that has jeopardized global security. The U.S. reports that the DPRK has sent 10,000 troops to Russia, likely to reinforce the Russian army, with some already near the Ukrainian border. He called for not involving the military. It would signal an escalation. The decision will also demonstrate that Russia needs external support because of its losses. This situation violates regional security and peace. Russia is dependent on other partners, and this could lead to disastrous consequences in the Eurasian region. Russia has to stop. It has to stop the war. It's never too late to withdraw from Ukraine and start rebuilding its position. The international community must act to protect Ukraine from Russia and the DPRK. A victory for Russia and the DPRK would undermine stability. The U.S. fully supports Ukraine, and the only safe solution is the complete withdrawal of Russian troops. China stated it did not respond last week when the foreign ministry was asked 3 times whether the DPRK was in Russia and preparing to enter the war. The Chinese foreign ministry's spokesperson initially claimed not to have heard the question about the DPRK, then stated they lacked information. After being asked again at a UN Security Council emergency meeting, China's Deputy Ambassador Geng Shuang expressed concern over the ongoing conflict, the destruction of energy infrastructure, and the suffering of civilians. This is a vague statement from a Chinese representative, reflecting ambivalence toward the situation. Xi Jinping, during the BRICS summit on October 23 to 24th, urged Putin not to escalate the conflict or involve third parties, implicitly referring to the DPRK. Some believe China is manipulating the situation to expand the conflict. China's UN ambassador called on the parties to refrain from actions that violate international humanitarian law, ensure peace for the civilian population, and ensure that the consequences of the war do not become irreversible. He called for a peaceful resolution of the conflict. China advocates for peace, dialogue, and seeks solutions. This stance should form the basis for a Global South initiative aimed at achieving sustainable peace and a political resolution to the conflict. The Chinese diplomat did not address the DPRK's involvement in the war, noting that colleagues discussed the Korean Peninsula. Beijing's stance is clear. It calls for peace and security in the region. The Pentagon has already seen and noticed a different opinion, and they say that if DPRK soldiers do fight on the side of Russian soldiers, they automatically become accomplices. There is every reason to believe that this will happen, but they will face a sad fate, warns U.S. Secretary of Defense Lloyd Austin. If DPRK soldiers fight alongside Russian forces against Ukrainians, Ukrainians have the right to defend themselves. And they will do it with weapons. If they fight alongside Russian soldiers, they become accomplices, and it's likely they will be killed or wounded on the battlefield. The Pentagon chief said that there are a number of options for what could happen, but refused to be specific. The possible participation of the DPRK military in Russia's war against Ukraine could lead to new forms of support for Kyiv by Western partners. The DPRK's involvement in Russia's war against Ukraine could lead to Western countries sending their military to fight on Kyiv's side. You referred to my comments on the potential expansion of the conflict. The possible involvement of the DPRK in the war in Ukraine may prompt others to take different types of action. But I'm not going to speculate about what exactly might happen. He added that there are a number of options for what could happen.